Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Coffee with Carl. I am your host, as always, Carl Zoellner, one of the attorneys with Anderson Business Advisors. And today I want to talk about one of the questions that comes up most with clients on my initial consultations with them. One of the questions that comes up with the clients are, we know you guys know tax, we know you know asset protection, but where do we start? Ultimately, my suggestion for my clients is where they start is number one, I want to build from a firm base. So let's get the estate plan in order. So let's make sure you have a living trust. The sort of main perk of a living trust is that there's no probate required with a living trust, or you have your best chance to avoid probate with a living trust because ultimately you're creating an entity that holds assets, so a judge doesn't have to decide what happens with those assets. Your successor trustee after you pass has a list of instructions on what to do with them after you pass, so no judge interference is necessary. Now, I don't know about anybody else out there, but to me that always sounds right. I don't want the government or the judicial system involved in my affairs, period. Especially at death, when I've spent a lot of time and effort building up these portfolios and things like that to be able to pass on to my wife and son. So the more I can keep, where there's an option, the more I can keep the government or the judicial system out of it, the better. Uh, so yeah, I would start with a living trust, and then I would also at the same time put together a Wyoming Holding LLC. Those of you who've seen us present, this would be your Blue Box LLC. This Blue Box is basically a super safe and private savings account or a place to put things that are you want to be anonymous, as well, including but not limited to holding of other LL business entities as well. So what I mean by that is ultimately when I'm looking at setting up a Wyoming holding company and a living trust, it works well to pair them together to set them up as a combination. So in that case, you can set them up that you have your estate plan in order, which will help you avoid probate. Which, if you've seen any of Toby Mathis's videos, you know that it's just a math equation, in that either you're going to be probating in every state you have assets, or you can have a living trust. So for a lot of you out there who are investors or new investors, they everybody sort of gets a little squeamish about setting up an estate plan. I even spoke with a person earlier this week. I won't share their name because technically I'm not supposed to with my professional rules of conduct as an attorney. But they had questions on, a financial planner told me I didn't need a living trust, didn't need all these things. And I'm saying, well, okay, but is that financial planner willing to put his neck on the line to tell you to sort of put his money where his mouth is and put an agreement in place that he's willing to pay for your probate or your estate to be probated if it's more than whatever the cost of the living trust is going for these days? And he said probably not, but I'll ask him. And so I'm waiting to hear back on that one, but I think it's traditionally that's usually a resounding no from that party who's sort of saying you don't need these things. Uh, we talk about it though. I mean, ultimately, for the most part, when you're looking at some pricing on those things, it doesn't even compare. The average cost of probate that I saw before uh, COVID was right around the $18,000 range. In about 18 months was what you can expect. And then imagine if you have assets across in any other states. Imagine having to do that multiple times. It's not even a question, right? I mean, long term, if you can do math, you understand that that's either an attorney's getting a chunk of your estate, or you can set up a living trust now while you're alive. And if and when you become incapacitated, it can kick in, so that's helpful. And once you die, ultimately your kids would still receive, or whoever the beneficiaries are would still receive the step up in basis, and you can go about and they can go about their business. So ultimately, yeah, living trust is a very important part of your entity structure. And then, like I said, I would pair it in the beginning with that Wyoming Holding LLC, because that Holding LLC provides a couple things: anonymity and asset protection. We use Wyoming because not because it's only the only state that allows for anonymity. There's actually about almost half of them sort of do, but it is the best combination between between anonymity, asset protection, having business courts, and being invested in their asset protection business, because they've sort of positioned themselves to be that best state in the nation. Used to be Nevada. Nevada gave that up from my perspective when they started charging about $750 a year per entity to maintain them. So went to Wyoming, and now it's $62 a year. Same, like I said, same protections, basically parallels almost exactly. It's just a much more reasonable cost, and where we can, we'll pass that on to you or pass it on to ourselves and use it ourselves. So we try to these days teach as close to what we do. And what we do is use Wyoming. So that's why we use it so much in our client structures, is because we use it on our own and we take a benefit from that. So we want to share those things with you as we go. So ultimately, yeah, that's why we like to use Wyoming as well. So in summary, like I said, if you're starting somewhere, where do you start with your asset protection structure? You start with having a plan on how you want to pass the things on that you're working so hard to save up for and purchase. And then number two is you protect them while you're alive. And that's where the business entity comes in. Because we should also mention that grantor trusts do not provide asset protection except for basically in one state, which is Florida. And then in that case, it's only partial protection. So ultimately, like I said, you got to plan to take care of things that you can't predict. So death is definitely being one of them, especially if you've got family you want to pass assets on to, or children that need to be planned for as well. That and so yeah, estate plan, living trust, number one, and then number two, I would have the Wyoming holding company and put them together at the same time. That way, the living trust can also own that holding company upon inception, versus having to assign it over later. Both are functional and both work fine. But ultimately, yeah, I would say if somebody's asking me where to start, it would be living trust in the Wyoming holding company. So that's it for this episode of Coffee with Carl. Thank you, everyone. Per usual, please keep taking advantage of all the free content that's out there, and we will be catching you on the next episode. So we will catch you on the next one. Thanks, everyone.